Australians really do love the sea. Most of them, 85% in fact, live within an hour's drive of the ocean. Come spring and summer, many of those will find their way down here to the beach.
The waters they'll swim in, though, are not theirs alone. As we're about to see, Australia's oceans are filled with an array of creatures that can bite, sting, maim, and even kill. Sharks are by far the biggest visible danger down under. Australia has more than 116 species of sharks. And while most of them are harmless, a few species are not. In the last 20 years, 26 people have been killed by sharks. This man knows their ferocity. Rodney Fox still bears the scars left when a white pointer snapped its jaws around his waist.
I put both arms around its belly, well back from its jaws, so it couldn't bite me anymore. And then I realised I needed air.
Crocodiles too are creatures of the sea. From coastal rivers, crocs have been known to swim hundreds of kilometres out to sea. In Australia's tropical north, crocs are a daily menace to ocean swimmers. This professional catcher lost half his hand trying to capture a croc that was threatening Darwin swimmers.
He grabbed hold of the whole hand first, went through here, but fortunately let go, and then as he spun, he ripped up 2 fingers off, that's all.
And this grandmother, Alicia Sorahan, almost lost her arm when a giant croc came out of the surf to drag a family friend from his tent.
Well, my arm, it was in here. It was trapped, I just couldn't get away. He had me held on my arm, and I couldn't pull. I would have lost my arm for sure.
But it's the smaller creatures that can pack a punch equally as deadly. Olive sea snakes have fangs long enough to penetrate a wetsuit. The blue-ringed octopus carries enough venom to paralyse 10 men, while the innocent-looking cone shell has been known to kill grown adults. So too have Iriganjis, stingrays, and box jellyfish. They're just some of the highly venomous and deadly creatures that can be found in the waters that surround the island continent of Australia.
The intention of this documentary is not to frighten you out of the water, but rather to show you what's out there and what to avoid. Remember, most of the creatures will only inflict damage on you if you touch them or get into their space. One creature of the sea that's been given a very bad rap lately are the stingrays. In the water, they're the most beautiful, graceful creatures to watch swimming along gently. And yet, as we now know, that sharp barb on their tail can be lethal.
The untimely death of the crocodile hunter, Steve Irwin, shows how dangerous the barbed-tail can be, particularly when it penetrates the chest. In Australia, there have only ever been 5 other recorded fatalities from stingrays. Yet many other people have been envenomated, mostly from accidentally standing on them in shallow water. It's well below the waves that you're likely to encounter a stingray. They're bottom dwellers, with most stings occurring when people accidentally step on them, as marine biologist Grant Willis explains.
Rays are all quite closely related to the sharks. They're called elasmobranchs, so rather than having a bony skeleton, they've got cartilage. The easiest way for the average person going for a snorkel to tell the difference between a shark and a ray, everyone knows the classic shape of a shark, but the best way to tell is sharks have their gills on the side of their head and rays have their gills underneath their body. This is an estuary ray, so they're really common in the estuaries where the river meets the sea, so in shallow waters, mud flats and things. They've got that big long whip-like tail. Halfway along that tail they've got their stinging barb, and that's what they use to defend themselves. That size ray, that's the size of the barb that it would have. Pretty tough material, lots of barbs on it. These things go in well, and then when they come out, it's when they do a lot of the damage.
One expert who's treated plenty of stingray wounds is Dr. Carl Edmonds.
I've been a diving physician now for some 40-odd years. Because of that, I end up seeing a lot of marine animal injuries from non-divers as well.
John Pearce has felt the full pain of a stingray barb.
We were just coming in from a big yacht, finished lunch, we went back out to the dinghy to get onto the yacht, and I was just walking in the water up to about my knees, and I was about 1 foot away from the dinghy, and then I trod on a stingray.
So when you tread on the ray, it's an automatic reflex. The tail comes up and the barb goes out and goes forward, and therefore it tends to penetrate the ankle.
And I've lifted my foot up, it was just gushing out with blood everywhere, like an artery had been severed or something like that. It was that bad.
The barb goes into the tissue and sends out a venom which is extremely painful, so that initially the symptoms are due to the venom or the toxin in the stingray spine.
It was like somebody getting a pen and ramming it into your foot. That's what it felt like. The pain was just immense.
For the first day or so, that's your problem, it's the venom. That's what's going to do all the damage, and that can actually kill you.
But we did all the wrong things, of course. You see blood and things, you try and stop it with ice.
The wound is extremely painful, it starts getting swollen, very hard to touch or to move. And so the first thing to do really is to put the wound into fairly hot water, about 45 degrees centigrade.
Let all the toxins come out. In fact, I've put all the toxins back into my system, and I started to shiver a bit and things like that. And I had a glass of wine to try and get over everything. I did ring my sister that night when it happened. She said go straight to hospital, but I didn't listen to her.
Commonly, there's a foreign body effect because a little bit of the stingray's spine or the skin over the spine has been left in the wound. And that's a foreign body effect, so that tends to start showing up a week or two after the injury.
I went to a medical clinic, and then they had a look at it. By that time it was numb and I could feel around in the area. It was like a little V that it had put onto my foot.
The wound may look as though it's closed over, and then it starts breaking open again.
I was given some antibiotics. That was okay for about a week. The day after I stopped taking the antibiotics, it got worse, so I went back to another doctor and told him what had happened. He gave me more antibiotics.
They're usually treated by the general practitioners, most of whom have had no training in treatment.
I went to see another doctor and just more antibiotics, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger.
There'll be a lot of dead tissue under that because the venom destroys tissue. So that's all got to be removed.
Then I went to Fiji and saw a Fijian doctor, and he suggested that I get the area debribed. Debribing is like cutting the whole thing out, replacing it with your own skin, a skin graft.
And once you remove that, there is unlikely to be any further long-term effects. But if you don't debride that or don't clean it, then you could be in big trouble.
But because I had the infections, the Staphylococcus and the Mycobacterium marinum, the first skin graft that they took didn't take, so I had to have a second operation, so I was in hospital in total for 20 days.
When you think of all the stingrays around our coastline, you get an awful lot of stings. In Australia, the deaths are essentially where the barb has actually penetrated the cavities, like the heart cavity or the lung cavity or the abdominal cavity.
And one of the few recorded deaths that I've ever heard of was a kid on a boat. They pulled one of those big guys up and the poor little kid was in the way, and it copped the spine right through his chest.
They didn't realise that the ray had gone in as far as it had. The spine had gone in, and then about 4 or 5 days later, when the wound necrosed, it just, the skin dies. He hemorrhaged and died that way.
So this is a classic area here, like where a stingray would have been. You can make out the outline here, in the tail section there. Once the tide goes out, it would have taken off. There's a distinctive shape though. There's another one just here. They're all over the place.
I only know of 5 deaths in Australia, but how does one? No one records these things, so there could be any number.
Wading in water like this or walking through water like this is not too bad, but I wouldn't be going out there any further with past my knees, no way in the world.
Lots of different types of stingrays in Australia. This big guy here is a smooth ray. That's the biggest stingray we've got in Australian waters. These things can get up to 350 kilos. That's a pretty massive animal. 2 and a bit metres across the wingspan and over 4 metres long from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail. You can imagine messing with this guy. He's got the power and the size, and they do have the sting on the tail, and they are very capable of defending themselves if need be.
They are absolutely not aggressive animals. They'll only sting you if you stand on them. Well, you don't want to be stood on. You wouldn't like that either.
When we return, the deadly blue-ringed octopus.
Before they know it, the kid stops breathing.
the evil-looking stomatopod, and killer cone shells.
It's the great Australian dream. A chance to come down to the coastline, enjoy the sun, take a swim, and go and check out some rock pools. Explore those rock pools, and you could happen upon this delightful but lethal creature. It's the blue-ringed octopus, and if it wraps those tentacles around your finger and bites you with its beak, it could inject you with lethal neurotoxins that could paralyse and eventually kill you.
He's got a poison that he uses for hunting prey. It's a cephalotoxin, and it affects the nerves and respiratory system.
Ben Brewer works with blue-ringed octopus every day at Sydney's Manly Oceanarium.
So if someone gets bitten by this, very quickly their heart and lungs start to slow down, and they just get really tired and drop off to sleep and never wake up. This little guy, the blue-ringed octopus, hunt in ambush style, things like crabs, little crustaceans, shrimps. A lot of people think these are baby common octopus because of their size, tiny little fellas. This one here, probably full grown. When a crab or a crustacean walks past, they'll creep up, and the way they do that is as you can see, they're quite cryptic. He's the same colour as that sandstone, and then when a crab wanders past within their range, they leap out, grab hold of them with their 8 tentacles that are very strong for the size of the animal, and then they'll turn them around, and with their beak, which is in the centre of their 8 legs, they bite through the carapace of the crustacean and inject the cephalotoxin. This acts immediately on the animal's central nervous system, and it basically dies instantly. They will use it in defence, and when they're defensive you can tell because they have intense neon blue rings that come up. As you can see at the moment, he's trying to hide, so he's pale. That's where people go wrong. They hear about this blue ring that's dangerous, and they find a cute little octopus that's brown or sand coloured in a rock pool, and they play with him and poke him, and he's one of the most deadly animals that they could ever come across in a rock pool. Kids will often pick them up in bottle lids, shells, things like that. They won't feel the bite, as it's also an anaesthetic. They'll just start to get really tired, drop off to sleep. Their parents won't think it's strange because they've been playing at the beach all day, and before they know it, the kid stops breathing.
Dr. Alistair Meyer specialises in toxic venoms.
It's a poison that paralyses our voluntary muscles. So our muscles that we need to breathe are paralysed, and therefore the patient dies of suffocation.
The way these guys bite, they grab hold of, say, the crab or the end of your finger, and they wrap their tentacles around it, and they have to manoeuvre the item right up to the centre of the 8 legs, where they've got a tiny beak, just like a parrot's beak, and they give you a quick little nip with that and inject a toxin. So, as you can imagine, it'd be quite hard to get bitten by one, but if you did, you wouldn't even know it.
Dr. Kirsten Benkendorf studies blue-ringed octopus for a living.
I'm a lecturer in marine biology. I pulled up a boulder out of a fairly deep rock pool, and underneath that boulder was a female blue-ringed octopus. They're not incredibly common on the New South Wales coast, but every so often I would see them where there's lots of good boulder habitats that they can actually inhabit. On this one particular occasion on North Wollongong Beach, I actually pulled up a boulder from quite a deep rock pool, and underneath that boulder there was actually a mother blue-ringed octopus carrying a whole bunch of eggs. When I saw this, I quickly returned the boulder, tried not to disturb her too much. I was terrified when my arm started tingling because I realised that they were the symptoms of a blue-ringed octopus envenomation. I was quite sure that I didn't touch either her or the egg masses. So what I assume must have happened was that she'd released some of the venom into the water or coated the boulder itself with some of this mucus that contains the venom. And I must have absorbed that through my skin.
The first aid treatment is as for a snake bite: pressure immobilisation, crepe bandaging up and down the affected limb, immobilise the limb, and transportation to hospital.
If somebody's actually there to administer CPR, they can keep you alive until the venom actually passes or until they get you to a hospital. But without CPR, basically you've got very little chance of survival.
With such a small but deadly creature lurking in Australia's coastal rock pools, beachgoers have been warned. Beware, this is the most venomous octopus in the world.
It's in Australia's tropical north that you'll find even more deadly creatures of the sea. On the Great Barrier Reef, for instance, there's an array of creatures that will harm, from evil-looking stomatopods to deadly shells to box jellyfish.
One little-known creature that can cause serious injuries to man is the stomatopod. These eerie-looking crustaceans are armed with powerful claws that are capable of snapping a man's finger. Cone shells are loaded with toxic venom. They inject this with a harpoon of poisonous barbs, paralysing the victim's central nervous system instantly. One species, the textile cone, is lethal to humans, killing 15 people since records were kept. And the box jellyfish, collected every year off Port Douglas beaches by Ben Kropp.
Normally, they come out about the end of November. These tentacles coming all the way back here, with a Polaroid you can see him, but without, not much chance. This one in particular, it's not what you'd call a killer. It will hurt, but it won't kill. A large one, an adult, may kill a child. And those tentacles do the damage. They have hundreds of little nematocysts in them, and on contact, they will actually fire these nematocysts into your body. Someone might dive in the water and they accidentally dive literally right onto a large adult, probably about 6 times this size. And if they get enough tentacles around their body, then the pain is so agonising that they can go into shock. I've had to test quite a few possible remedies for box jellyfish stings, and all you can do is sting yourself and see if they work. There's one. Unfortunately, we're yet to find a really good first aid treatment. I'll show you this one, Greg. Now hold the bucket. Watch out, there's a lot of tentacles there.
So these tentacles contract, do they?
They contract when you bring them out. Underwater, you'll see them sort of splayed out about 1 metre long. This is a highly intelligent animal. Now, it's got 4 eyes. All right, there's one eye, another one here, and here, and of course the other side. So it can see all around, 360 degree. And unlike jellyfish washed up on the beach, you don't see these guys washed up. They're too smart for that.
What you're asking me to do, Ben, is to actually sting you.
Yeah.
Which makes you either very brave or very foolish.
Put it on. Yeah, I've got to feel. Ooh.
So what's the pain now? Can you describe the pain to us?
Oh, it's like a lot of bees stinging you.
So in another month, when that gets so much bigger...
I'm not stupid. I'm not going to give myself 3 metres of tentacles and put myself in hospital. This I can stand. Anyway, if you can grab the vinegar, this is the best first aid remedy. Just pour it over here. Fairly liberal.
Yep. Now, is that immediate relief?
That's enough. It's still stinging. What is happening, a lot of these nematocysts haven't fired. If I moved this stuff around, they would fire more into me. Now the vinegars neutralise them. It's not stopping the initial pain, but it's going to stop any further envenomation.
Ahead, more deadly jellyfish.
They eventually had to induce me into a coma.
Venomous sea snakes.
And eventually the temptation just became too great.
And killer crocs and sharks.
It dragged me down underwater again.
On the other side of the continent, the Ningaloo Reef attracts another set of deadly creatures. This is the feeding ground for a true giant of the sea, the world's largest shark, the whale shark. Full size, they're as long and as heavy as a school bus. But as imposing as they look, they're harmless. Not so some of the creatures that swim near them. In a Sherlock Holmes mystery, a lion's mane jellyfish is identified as the killer. Despite their beauty, they're actually very venomous. They're also gigantic, with a bill that can get up to almost 3 metres in diameter, and tentacles that can stretch out for more than 60 metres. Not only are they the world's largest jellyfish, but they're also found in waters right around the Australian coastline.
We don't get that many pass through on the reef, but there have been human fatalities recorded from the lion's manes, and just basically thousands of these tentacles wrapping around.
The moray eels here can also inflict a vicious bite.
Morays have got pretty nasty jaws. You'll probably find most people get bitten by them because they're feeding them. Morays haven't got very good eyesight, so they've got good sense of smell. So if someone's down there dangling a bit of food, the old moray comes out and sometimes it bites a little bit more than what it should do.
and the olive sea snakes, capable of the most lethal bite of all.
Yes, they are the world's most venomous snake, a lot more potent than any land snake.
The bite itself is not particularly painful and may go unnoticed at first.
And I've never ever been afraid of anything underneath the water, but I remember first seeing that first sea snake, and it was literally like a land snake, but underneath the water. As you can just imagine it slithering, sliming, that same face, beady little eyes. And my first thought was, yuck, I'm not going to touch that. And I literally turned around him and gave him quite a clear signal, not a diving signal, underneath the water that there was no way. But he slowly got me confident and he just let it move about my body. And I could see that this thing was not aggressive whatsoever. And eventually the temptation just became too great. I ended up wanting to play with the sea snake more than it wanted to play with me.
Once you get to know them, they'll settle down and you can actually quite comfortably handle them. We don't recommend everyone grab a sea snake, but you can actually quite interact with them and actually hold them in your hand. And yes, they can bite you.
Kelly has even thought through what she'd do if she was bitten.
Yeah, we'd probably go through compressing it and that kind of thing, and then we've got a pretty fast little boat here, so I think we'd zip back into town pretty quickly and off to the hospital.
Further north, there's a very small jellyfish that produces near fatal symptoms, the Iriganji. Mark Longhurst has had a very nasty encounter with one of them.
Bit of a cyclone brewing off the coast, had a big swell through, so managed to get off early from work and shoot down for a quick surf. And there's probably about 60 people out making the most of it, and been out in the water for about 15 minutes enjoying a well-earned surf. When all of a sudden a jellyfish went up the back of my board shorts and stung me on my right thigh.
Researching the Iriganjis is Dr. Phil Alderslade.
The sting is quite mild, so the people didn't even realise that they've been stung by a jellyfish at that stage. The patient brushes up against one of these things, gets a cursory sting. Only a minute amount of venom is injected because the animal is so small, but that's enough to cause very serious problems in the patient.
I originally thought it must have been a big box jellyfish by the severity of the sting. Couldn't see any big whip marks typical of the big boxies, so breathed a sigh of relief and thought, well, it's not a box jellyfish. Can't be an Iriganji because I've never heard of Iriganjis hurting so much when they sting. Possibly some of the severity of the toxicity of the sting was the fact that the jellyfish was caught under the board shorts and just sitting there and envenenating for about 15 minutes.
Stings can occur from the tentacles, but also from on the bell of the jellyfish as well. The bell has little tiny dots on it. If you put those under a microscope, you can see they're actually made up of many, many stinging cells. So you have one type of stinging cell on there and different types that are in the tentacles.
About 10 minutes after the sting, I started getting really tight in my chest, so I paddled back into the beach with difficulty to breathe, and that was about when I realised that, gee, something's going on here.
People have thought that they've had the bends, people have thought they've been having gastric traumas, and then this pain starts to spread into the abdomen.
And when I got to the beach and tried to stand up, had excruciating pain through my lower back and my neck, and found it hard to walk, doubling up with pain. Felt like the chest was just caving in.
This is just accompanied by things like a massive headache, a huge feeling of doom that the end of the world is nigh, nausea, tremor, racing heart, extremely high blood pressure.
By the time I got to the top of the stairs, I was screaming in agony. I was gasping for breath, and it was a battle between having the energy to scream in agony and actually take a breath to keep going. I kept going and made it to my car, tried to pick up a mobile phone to phone somebody and couldn't coordinate any of my body to dial the numbers. Thankfully, a young guy came up to see if I was okay, so he drove me to the hospital, which was about a 15-minute drive. And the whole time I was in the car driving to the hospital, I was envisaging lying in the back of the car, suffocating, not breathing, and nobody knowing that I'm suffocating and not being able to do anything about it. The drop in the blood pressure was so high, they administered morphine immediately with no effect, and they kept administering morphine to try and get some relief from the pain, and by the time I drank the hospital dry of morphine, it still had no effect.
So although there is a relatively new treatment being tried now, which is an infusion of magnesium sulfate, which is seems to be fixing a lot of the problems.
And with the amount of drugs that they put into me over the course of a number of hours, they eventually had to induce me into a coma to keep all my systems working because of the amount of drugs that my body was taking, with very little effect to the symptoms of the sting. The Royal Flying Doctor flew me to Perth, admitted to Sir Charles Gardner Hospital into the intensive care, still on life support, and I was unconscious for 2 to 3 days. It's something that I've been exposed to for quite a while, being involved in the pearling industry, and our pearl divers get stung every season by Iriganjis. Since being stung, I've learnt a lot more about them. They're an amazing creature. They're not like the typical jellyfish that I always envisage as just drifting around the ocean with the currents, and if you're unlucky enough to bump into one, well, so be it. These things have got 4 eyes, 360-degree vision. They come in with a rising tide into the shallows, and then they hunt in the falling tide in the shallows, and they can actually see their prey and hunt it a bit like a trawler would. When I swim in the areas that we're at high risk from them, I wear a full-length stinger suit now.
A full-range stinger suit will cover the majority of your body, so you're going to reduce the risk of about 80%. These are just little booties that I wear, and I also wear some gloves of similar material because that's going to protect more of my body as well.
I didn't bring any vinegar to the beach with me. Possibly if I had got out of the water as soon as I got stung and applied vinegar to the site, the severity of the sting may not have been as bad as what it was, despite the fact I've had 15 wet seasons in Broome and I know the dangers of box jellyfish here and that you really should swim with stinger suits, or not swim at all. But I didn't take any of those precautions, so I took the risk and had the unlucky incidents of running into one.
Still to come, survivors of croc attacks.
I said, you know, where's the baby? And she said, the baby's all right, but it's Croc got Andrew.
One far larger deadly creature found along the coast in Australia's tropical north is the saltwater crocodile. They can swim for hundreds of kilometres out to sea, and when they return to the beaches, they're a real danger to human swimming. Well, this crocodile is some 4 to 5 years old, and even at this young age, he's still incredibly strong. If he were to open his jaws and rake his teeth across my face, he'd cause considerable injury. And give him another few years, he could take down and kill a fully grown human adult. There's certainly a fascination with crocodiles in Australia's top end. Such is the very real threat to swimmers in Darwin Harbour, the council has appointed its own croc catchers. Tommy Nichols and Clay Smith are full-time croc catchers, patrolling the waters around Darwin every day to catch crocs that have been caught in their traps.
Okay, this is the west arm trap. At the moment, it appears the door's down, so we may be in luck. Some people don't want to see any crocs in the harbour, but it's a possibility because Darwin is part of the crocodile area. There's always going to be crocs here. We do our best to relieve the area as much as possible of crocs. Just a little one. Okay, we have a small animal in the trap. They can grow up to 6 metres plus, but I've never seen one over 6 metres.
He's just going over his top jaw, so we've got a bit of control over him.
This is what we call a snout rope.
First, get the rope around his top jaw, so to do that he's got to open his mouth.
I've caught my first croc about 22 years ago. I love it. She's adrenaline boost, there's no doubt about that.
Some of them just want to jump out of the trap and kill you, others are dead scared of you, or everyone's different.
He doesn't want to be here.
We're going to use this cable tie just to close his jaw temporarily. You're not going to grab him with just the cable tie on, but it's enough to cure him properly.
Yes, he could give you a nasty bite, there's no doubt about that. Some quieten down pretty easy and some don't. So I always say they're unpredictable.
Female, son?
Female. This one day croc farms will keep as a breeding stock. All the animals we catch go to the croc farms. They put in a tender system and they pay the government a nominal fee for them depending on size and sex. We had a different procedure of tying up that we used to use a cord, and it was just one animal that decided to jump. He grabbed hold of the whole hand first, went through here, but fortunately let go, and then as he spun he ripped the 2 fingers off, that's all. It wasn't the crocodile's fault, he didn't want to be there. It's one of those things that happen, that's all. wherever you've got crocodiles and humans, there's a potential danger of a problem. But fortunately at this stage we haven't had any problems in Darwin Harbour. I dare say in the future there will be, but we do our best to keep it clear of crocodiles.
The end of another day.
One area not patrolled are the beaches of far north Queensland. Bill and Alicia Sorahan with their son Jason were enjoying a quiet fishing trip at Bathurst Bay.
We never see crocodiles down the beach here at all. They're all right up in the creek up further, a couple of kilometres away, but not where we camp. They're not there.
We've seen one up actually in the mouth of that river, and he mustn't be too aggressive because there used to be a bull used to swim across that creek of an afternoon and nothing ever worried him. We just let him go, so we know they're here. We leave them alone and they leave us alone. I'm quite happy to live that way. The grandkids are with us. We make sure they're not near the water and that. It's very tempting to go swimming, but we don't go swimming, but I've seen people up there that do go swimming. We were asleep about 4 o'clock in the morning. And we heard this loud screaming and I thought, oh, well, someone's having a nightmare.
Someone that's screaming, it's really in trouble. It's a noise you'll never forget.
It was really loud, it's terrible.
Yeah, and I looked over at the granddaughter who was sleeping with us, and she was sound asleep and the screaming kept going, so we realised it was outside here somewhere. So I grabbed a torch, I unzipped the tent and we started going out of the tent. And I started going this way. I thought Alicia was behind me, but she'd gone that way. And as I come around this corner, because I had to go around the fireplace and all the timber work, next thing I shone the torch onto this croc. I couldn't believe the size of it. Then I thought the only thing I'm going to stop it with is with the axe. So I actually came back here. The axe was in the wood heap.
Well, in the meantime, I sort of rushed around here and I spoke to Diane. I said, you know, where's the baby? And she said, the baby's all right, but it's Crocodile Andrew.
Grabbed the gun and run out of the tent, run past Mum and Dad's tent. Just was screaming at the other side of the tent, Andrew's tent.
And all I could think was just jumping on it to try and pull it off Andrew. Well, I had my arm sort of over him and was trying to hang on to pull him off Andrew as he sort of threw back his head. And that's when he hit me on the face and broke my nose and that. And then when I fell over, it's when he grabbed my arm. And I couldn't move. He had hold of me then and that was it.
It was pitch black, it's hard to see anything. I just sort of come over and jumped onto his back as well. I kneeled across the back of him with the gun and fired a couple of shots into him.
By the time I got back down to where the croc is, you'd swear you could see the bullets going into it. It looked like everything was going in slow motion.
Eventually it released me and I got up and my arm was just hanging there.
I looked up and Mum was sort of running around and Dad came up and grab her and take her away.
I spotted her because it looked like it was about a 3-inch hole in her arm.
My arm was just hanging down. It was only hanging by a little bit of skin here and a few veins. There was something rather than was just down here. I thought it was gone. It was just hanging there, you know, walking around. Look, my arm's gone, you know.
Got up and fired 2 more shots into him and he sort of just, that was it. You know, he just died then.
No one would answer the CB radios or anything, and I thought the best way was to try and take her out. You know, it was a 5-hour drive out of there.
Well, it was strange. I didn't really feel anything. It just was numb.
Put a pillow underneath her arm, another cushion on top, and the daughter sat in the back with the 2 grandkids, and that's the way we drove out. We checked to see whether Andrew was all right. First they said he was just bleeding. We didn't realise at the time that he had a broken leg and a broken arm.
I'm 54 kilos and he's 300 kilos, so it was a big crocodile. It was 4.2 metres, yes, it was a big croc, yeah, but I mean, somebody had to help Andrew and I was there first, so that was my decision. I jumped on him to help him.
Well, I think she's braver than what I am, because my first reaction was to get an axe. It's the only thing I could think of stopping this monster.
I'd do it again. Anybody would do it, yeah.
Next, fighting off a great white shark.
I put both arms around its belly, well back from its jaws, so it couldn't bite me anymore. And then I realised I needed air.
Of all Australia's deadly sea creatures, it's the great white shark that has earned the fiercest reputation due to a number of fatalities in recent years. In Australia's southern waters, they're in abundance.
These ferocious predators are armed with up to 3,000 razor-sharp teeth, with sharks up to 6 metres having been caught in these waters off southern Australia. The great white was responsible for a recent fatal attack off an Adelaide beach. One man who's experienced the jaws of death is Rodney Fox. 40 years ago, when he was just 24 years old, Rodney Fox was attacked by a great white shark off the coast of South Australia. Its razor-sharp teeth almost tore him in half.
I was swimming in the South Australian Spearfishing Championships in 1963, and I was the state champion. And there were 40 divers and lots of fish had been speared. After 4 hours, I swam offshore and dived down, and I was just about to spear a fish when this huge bang and thump hit me in my chest. I thought I'd been hit by a train, then I realised it was a giant shark. And I remembered gouge its eyes, gouge its eyes. So I gouged its eyes as I was being hurled through the water, and the shark let me go. I pushed it away, my hand went in its mouth, I dragged it out knowing it was badly cut. I put both arms around its belly, well back from its jaws, so it couldn't bite me anymore. And then I realised I needed air. I went to the surface and took a big breath of air. The shark followed me up and I saw it through the bright red water, which was my blood. It came up and swallowed the fish float I was towing, and it dragged me down underwater again because it was attached to my belt. I tried to find the catch for my belt and I couldn't find it, and I was just about to give up and breathe water, and a miracle happened, the line snapped. I managed to get to the surface, and a boat was coming over to see what all the bright red water was. I managed to climb into the boat, well, with a big help, and they raced me off to hospital. It was a miracle I survived. They said another 2 minutes out of hospital and I wouldn't have been here today. I had over 460 stitches in my chest. My ribs were broken, lung was punctured, the main artery from the heart to the stomach was exposed. My arm had 92 stitches. It's all healed reasonably up, but they made one mistake. They stitched my skin to my muscle, so I could do this now where most people can't.
Within weeks he was back in the water, and since then he's dedicated his life to the preservation of the much feared ocean predator that almost killed him.
It's been my aim to try and help and to get this myth that they're just man-eaters and killers away. And I believe we have to learn to live with the sharks and not actually kill them from fear. They're in their world. They eat their way they eat. We have to learn to live with them. And so some of my message is getting through.
Coming up, survivors of another shark attack. Ben Kropp is a legendary underwater filmmaker, taking his boat out onto the Great Barrier Reef most days of the year. Filming sharks has led to some very dangerous encounters.
The whales were probably potentially the worst. To get sharks in, we normally bait them. So in this case, we speared some fish, and they pick up the vibrations of speared fish and rush in. And they did. About 4 rushed in, ate the fish, but then about 6 more appeared, and there was no fish left. And I looked around and thought, well, we can't see the food, we're going to get this guy. And all 6 sharks raced at me at the same time. And believe me, I literally panicked in a way because I couldn't handle 6 sharks coming at me. And I backpedaled, kicked with my flippers, kicked them in the head, and pushed them with the camera. And they eventually turned. But I was worried because only one had to bite and the rest would have, come in on me. But I kept the camera running, being an old filmo, and it seemed to go on and on. I was getting exhausted. But when I looked at the film, it was only 15 seconds. That's all.
For Ben Kropp, the most aggressive creatures he's encountered are the tiger sharks.
Well, I've been filming tiger sharks for about 40 years. They're not difficult to film. The main problem is to get them to the boat, because that takes a lot of time, and usually we have to burley them up, put fish carcasses out and so forth. And I might sit here for 2 hours before the first tiger appears, and then I might wait another hour for that tiger to take its first bite. And once he's got that first bite, he's locked on in his mind, I'm going to eat that. You know, it doesn't seem to realise it's being pulled in. We've got the tiger shark right at the back of the boat. And sometimes, well, I've had anything up to 10 tigers at the back of the boat at one time.
His closest encounter came when he was above water in his inflatable with 2 friends.
We first had to go and spear some fish for dinner because we didn't bring any food out. So we hopped in the dinghy, we saw these Torres Strait Islanders, and we came up to them, they'd hauled this turtle in, and when we set our buys and left, we immediately saw a tiger shark. This tiger shark had come in for the turtle and had missed out. And we got really close, and the tiger turned and bumped the dinghy.
And I just looked over, and all I could see coming out of the water was like out of a Jaws movie. This shark just came out of the water and just latched on.
And the teeth are going through the pontoon. Pop, pop, pop. Air's hissing out.
It just wouldn't let go. And it just hung on, and then it just turned over, and all you could see was the white part of its stomach and all its teeth all exposed, and it just kept tearing and hanging on.
By about 3 minutes, I started to get worried. I thought, if this guy doesn't get his teeth out of this, he's going to flip the dinghy. I guess the tiger shark kept eating the dinghy for about another minute, and then eventually got his teeth undone and swam away. And we were stuck with a totally deflated side of the dinghy. Certainly a write-off.
I'll never trust a tiger shark. I'll trust other sharks, but never a tiger shark.